let's get the party started. So, focus of today's topic. So, how to hit 125% of your quota during a downturn. We're going to talk specifically, and I'll make some introductions here in a second. Kind of like what's changed right now. What's different now about selling, and what's going to be different over the next 6-12 months versus 6-12 months ago. So, a couple things. If you got a question, we would love to answer it. So, feel free to drop it into the chat or use the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom. Quick introduction. Jake here from the Zoom info side, he is an account executive that really believes in self-sourcing pipeline. I mean, 50% of his pipe he self-sources. So he's very, very good at outbound, has a lot to add to the conversation today. So Jake, I'm excited to have you here, dude.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too.
You. He also wants you to know that he's still bad at jujitsu. That's what he put on his LinkedIn profile. So.
And will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Armand does a lot of things, but right now he's VP of sales at Pave, and he's also co-host of one of my favorite sales podcasts, probably the top sales podcast out there, 30 Minutes President's Club. So Armand, good to have you again, man. Always fun to jam with you. And you also said on your LinkedIn profile that you're most known for laughing at objections and going on rants about bad telemarketers. So I thought that was an interesting fact about you.
There it is.
Let's get started. So just context for today. I want to throw this question your way first, Armand. What's different? Like, you run a decent sized team of folks right now. What's different? How are you speaking with your reps about what's different right now and what it's going to be like over the next 3, 6, 9 months versus what it was like a year ago?
Yeah, and so we try to break down the sales cycle into 3 different parts of selling, right? If you think of it very simply, for anyone here who's a full cycle rep, there are 3 major things you have to do. You have to prospect to build pipeline. You have to run discovery calls to find problems. And then you have to close or manage your sales process to ultimately get those deals over the line. And each of those 3 different parts, prospecting, discovery, and closing, have changed. So prospecting, the reality is fewer people are replying. Fewer people are even open to a conversation because their budgets are getting cut in half. So what's changed there is you have to have double the pipeline coverage and oftentimes double the prospecting activities just to net the same pipe that you were going to have before. In your discovery conversations, you'll get people who might have problems, right? But the reality is those problems now have to be so much larger relative to the other problems in their business. And so the magnitude of the problems you have to find in discovery are substantially larger. And then when you think about closing, you might have been able to win a single threaded deal in the past. And the reason for that is companies were willing to burn capital to try anything they could do to grow. But now what's being praised in the market is no longer growth at all costs, but profitability. And so a lot of sellers in this room have probably gotten deals that you would have considered a commit 6 months ago. You've gotten them to the finish line and you committed them in your forecast. And the deals that would have closed easily, I'm seeing them taken out of procurement, or literally they're getting ripped out of red lines. When a contract is literally being negotiated, they're being ripped out at the finish line. And what that means is you have to be so much more wide in the organization in your sale than you've ever had to be in the past.
Ooh, and we're going to do a deep dive into those kind of 3 parts, top, middle, bottom of the funnel. But yeah, we're going to have to do more top of funnel. We got to attach to bigger problems, and we can't be single threaded anymore and get away with it. Jake, we had talked in the conversation prepping for this. You made a really good point around how quota is calculated and how to hit quota, like kind of the numbers that an organization, like the guidelines that they give to you in terms of where that quota is going to come from, like taking that in consideration, and how it's changed. You want to just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it is, when it comes to inbound leads and everything like that, when it's more difficult times than this, it's not a secret. All that stuff kind of goes down, right? So quota generally goes down in relation to that. So essentially, you have a great opportunity if you're someone who's able to self-source and is able to create their own pipeline, because essentially what happens is your quota goes down, because there's less inbound leads, there's less of everything coming in, but you're still bringing in those juicy deals that you're outbound prospecting, that's when you just blow out your number.
Yeah. What percentage are you thinking that you're going to have to self-source to, hit 125% quota, hit 150% quota? Like what percentage of that are you going to have to self-source?
So, the reality is when you have inbound meetings coming in, that can feel like a roulette wheel. So the answer is, maybe I get some great inbounds coming in and I have a great month and I'm able to do it without self-sourcing. But the reality is we just have no idea. So what I've seen kind of recently is I can rely on my SDR, I can rely on marketing to, maybe bring me to 40, 50% of my number on average. But if I'm trying to get, 125, 130%, I'm looking at my number and I'm thinking, how can I self-source that? And everything else I get is kind of gravy on top.
Yeah. I'd love to ask this question to the audience as well. David said, where's this mythical company where quotas go down? I'm seeing at a few of the larger organizations, when I say large, I mean 5,000 plus employee count, I do see some quota like relief, so to speak, but most companies are not lowering quota is sort of what I'm seeing. I'd love to just ask the audience though, for you account executives out there, what percentage of your pipeline do you think that you're going to need to self-source just to get to quota by the end of this year? Drop that percentage into the chat. Account executives, what percentage of your pipeline do you think that you're going to need to self-source in order to hit 100% of your quota?
Wow, there's some big numbers in there.
It is high.
Someone said 125% to hit 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I don't know. Do these numbers surprise you guys? Jake, Armand, does this surprise you guys at all?
To be honest, it doesn't. I resonate with the folks in the chat that are talking about 100% because they don't get any inbound or any SDRs. That's been my life pretty much my whole career. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ion says no inbound here.
Yeah.
Armand, we had talked about something around the mindset piece of like what it means to have a full pipeline and what that allows you to do and the freedom that it kind of gives you. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think this is bigger than just what we need to do during a downturn.
Yeah. And so while the unfortunate reality is that while quotas might not go down, what is happening across companies is the number of reps at times is going down. And that's tough for everyone to hear, right? But the reasons that companies are doing that is to stabilize the inbound leads and make it such that hopefully by having fewer folks on the team, attainment starts to stabilize because there's the smaller pie is at least feeding a smaller number of people, right? And so if you believe that ultimately what will happen is quota attainment will start to equalize and it'll probably drop a little bit in an economic downturn. What ultimately still matters and has always mattered is how you perform relative to your peers. And there are two things you can do in sales. You can create pipeline or you can close pipeline. And in a bull market, if you were only focused on closing pipeline, you might have gotten to 70 to 80% of your number. Or if you were really good, you might have even gotten to quota off of inbound leads, right, at your company in a bull market because it's flush with cash, right? But to get to 150 or 200%, you were doing that really well and you were filling your funnel. And now what's happened is the bars have just moved. The field goal posts or the whatever it's called, the first down post, they've moved back 50 yards. And if you're only focused on closing, you're going to maybe get to 50% of your number, right? Over 50% of their reps of reps in the world right now aren't hitting quota. And so you're only going to get to 50% of your number max if you're just closing. So to get to 100%, you've got to have extra 3 to 4x pipe coverage when you might have only needed 2 to 3 in the past. And you will only be rewarded if you are both closing effectively and filling your funnel like a madman.
Yeah. I think that I want to talk first. We'll get into tons of tactics. You guys here on top of funnel, middle, kind of bottom of the funnel stuff. I'll just kind of throw this question out for both of you. When I hear this, what I hear is like the mindset component of holy shit, I'm going to have to work way harder than I had to 6 or 12 months ago. Like wrapping my head around that and motivating myself to do that and showing up every single day knowing that I have to hit 4 to 5x pipeline coverage versus, I mean, it's insane. How do you guys think about that, from a mindset standpoint and staying motivated, charged up, like fired up to get after it and do that?
That's a really, really great question. And I think it comes down to perspective, because you can look at yourself and you can say, hey, last year I put in half the effort and I got twice the results. This is so unfair. I don't like this, right? You can have the negative mindset. But I mean, for most of us, this wasn't our first job out of college. Like I remember my first job out of college and I was so excited to be making $45,000 a year, right? And going door to door selling telecom services. So I think it's about mindset. It's like, there are so many people that just got laid off and would literally kill to have my job. So both are true. It is unfair. I'm not doing, the same I did like last year with the same amount of effort. That's true. But it's also true that I'm in an awesome position when so many people would kill to be in my shoes. So I just try to think about that every morning and remind myself I'm going to die.
Yeah. Like the cap on that, like, oh yeah, and I'm gonna die.
I'm gonna die. So if I'm gonna complain and I'm gonna get in my, I got stuff to do.
Dude, I love it, man. Armand, how do you think about this personally? And then you're running a big team, of course, too. How do you think about motivating, energizing your team, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, and so here's the thing, folks, is there are some comments around what it's like to be at a new startup, at a company that's selling nice to haves and all that stuff. But in a bull market, there's so much money to go around that everyone's like, if I'm not hitting 125% working 6 hours a day, right, my life is terrible. And what happens is these economic downturns are a little bit of a wake up moment for everyone. And it starts at the company level, right? And so it's a wake up to a lot of the businesses that are nice to haves. They're not great businesses, what have you, right? And those companies are going to be tougher. And the really good reps at those companies are going to have to go find other companies where they're selling more of a necessity, right? But then once you're at the right company, I think the important thing to realize, folks, are 3 things. So the first is the least protected job in the company is being a sales rep, but also the most protected job in the company is being a sales rep. If you are a top rep and you can show that you can hit numbers and generate pipe and hit quota or exceed it in an economic downturn, you are the most protected person in the company because you are breathing the lifeblood through that company when no one else is able to do those things. And what that does for you personally is it not only puts bread on the table, but what it also does is what people don't realize is a ton of career acceleration happens in economic downturns. Because when everyone was getting to quota before, it was like, how can I show that I did 150% when everyone else was doing 125? But if you can do 100 when everyone else is doing 25%, all of a sudden, what this does on the 5 to 10 year horizon for your career will make this moment actually look like a blessing in disguise.
Dude, I love that. It's just like with anything, other type of economic downturns that we've had in the past. The last one, and this is when I was just getting started with my sales career, 2008, 2009. This stuff passes. It passes. That's how the economy works, and I love that. Thinking about like the career trajectory, the stock that you're building within your company, like your personal brand. Like, dude, it's just like it's time to get after it, dude. Let's get after it. I want to start with, so we're going to start to get into some tactical stuff now. I want to get into productivity and time management first, because I think that preparing yourself to be a machine, Armand, as you like to phrase it, super important. If I'm going to need to increase my output by 20, 30, 40%, there are ways to do that that don't exactly require just adding more hours to your calendar, right? And I want to just kick this question your way first, Jake. How do you think about like attacking your week? Like, get kind of tactical with me in terms of like, how do you plan? How do you think about when you're going to do stuff? Like, how do you attack the open space on your calendar?
Yeah. So really what it is for me is when you think about additional time on your calendar and you don't have a meeting, there's not too many things that you can do as a sales rep. You can watch chorus calls and you can try to improve your skills. You can send follow-ups and do things like that. But the reality is prospecting and bringing new opportunities in and turning over stones is, in my opinion, the most effective way to take care of that time. So kind of what I like to do is I like to time block 2 hours for myself, either in the morning or in the afternoon. Because for me, it takes me a little bit to warm up prospecting. I know that some folks can do like an hour block. I find for me, it takes me 10, 15 minutes to warm up. And then once I'm on a roll, I want to keep on going. So what I try to do is make those 2 hour blocks before my calendar gets crazy. Yeah. And then I just kind of do it that way.
How do you protect that time?
Really what it is I go on my calendar and I see that I'm starting to get crazy, and I literally make an event for 2 hours so that I can't get any inbound meetings. I can't have any SDRs putting stuff on my calendar. So it's literally, it's just my time.
One of the things I love that, by the way, one of the things I always say is the most important time that you can block off on your calendar, the most important appointments are the ones with yourself. Like a lot of times when I look at and have reps share their calendars, it's only appointments on that calendar with other people or team meetings. There's nothing in there that's like, this is time that I'm spending like with myself on my pipeline, right? So block that time off. Absolutely. And Armand, you have a slide, I don't know if you have it handy or not, that you showed that I thought was really interesting, but you have this concept of like how to be a machine. And one of the things I really relate with both of you on is we take our productivity very seriously, and I think that mentality of how do I get the most out of every single minute of the time that I'm working so that I can just shut it off is just killer. So Armand, this how to be a machine concept, you want to run us through that?
Yeah. So I'll show y'all two images super, super quickly. But the first premise is the premise of your golden hours. So the hours between 8 and 3 p.m. here, folks, are your golden hours. These golden hours should be reserved for nothing but customer calls, live cold calls, live cold emails, and time-sensitive deal correspondence. Things that are actively involving generating pipeline or actively meeting with customers to progress pipeline. And then 3 p.m. and onward were reserved for recap emails or account research or the stuff that you need to do to prepare yourself to prospect the next day, like list building. So what this looks like as an account executive is, for those of you guys who don't know, I was pretty early on at Pave. And when we were 10 employees, I was an AE, but at the same time running the sales team. So I was trying to sell and hire and build a team at the same time. And so I had to be ruthlessly efficient with my time. So this is what my calendar actually looked like. Is purple were customer calls or discovery calls. Red was a customer onboarding. And anything in dark blue was working time. And so what would happen is, as my day would start to get ugly, I have demo requests coming in that I don't always control, or an SDR is booking stuff on my calendar. I have these calls in purple that are getting thrown on my calendar. And usually 3 to 4 days out, what you want to do is you want to look ahead to the end of your week or to next week. And if you start seeing your day get ugly like this, you need to block prospecting time on your calendar so no one can book over it. And so I will explicitly, if I see a day that looks like this, I'll start to put dial blocks on the calendar. I'll start to put an outreach task blast on the calendar. And then anything that's a one-on-one happens at the end of the day. So the recipe, folks, to remind as a recap, is your customer calls will start to land in your golden hours. You start to block your prospecting time. All of your recap emails happen at the end of the day, back to back to back to back. All of your account research happens back to back to back to back at the end of the day. And if you need to block time for things like Slack or email or text, I usually like to do 2 blocks. One around 8 or 8:30 a.m. to check inbox and Slack, and then one around lunch to check inbox or Slack. And the final one comes at the end of the day outside of golden hours.
Okay. I want to, people are hilarious in the chat, by the way. Do you not eat lunch, Armand, during the day? How do you squeeze it in? I'm curious.
I do not eat while I dial, or eat something like dim sum where it's very easy to just grab a bite and eat one exact bite and then keep cold calling. But that was a no lunch day. But usually I cram 30 minutes of lunch in somewhere.
Yeah. So again, I want to throw this question out to both of you because one of the things that you pointed out there, I see this, it's a struggle internally with how responsive do I need to be with internal requests, and emails are coming in. You know, there seems to be this challenge with finding time every day that's not distracted. So I'm just curious, Jake, at Zoom Info, how do you guys do that? Or how do you think about, hey, when I have these times where I'm heads down, making calls, sending emails, how do you think about Slack and then like incoming emails and all of that kind of stuff? How do you balance that? Or do you proactively block stuff off like Armand does? How do you think about that and approach that?
So I mute Slack because Slack, I don't have any customers coming to me on Slack. So there's no reason at all for me to have Slack up, in my opinion. So what I'll do is I've got multiple screens here. So sometimes I'll have my inbox up while I'm prospecting, in case a customer comes up and, it's something that's super important, right? That I need to jump on. There's a chance that's a customer. And if I got to go get a deal signed, then I'm going to go do that instead of prospecting, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in general, I'm pretty much ignoring my inbox, and I just have it open because I'm prospecting too. So I'll send emails as well. So it makes sense to have that up. But unless it's urgent and it's someone I've been trying to get a hold of for 3 weeks and they want to meet now, it can wait.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Armand? This giving yourself permission to be productive, kind of thing is something I just see a lot of people struggle with.
Totally. So a lot of people will be like, well, what if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? And like the problem is they're living their life around the exceptions and the edge cases of what happens if I don't do this. And what I would rather have folks do is train the people around you to know that if you don't respond immediately, there's usually a reason for it. And so another like super quick example is literally while writing the training that you saw, this is what my Slack looked like afterwards. It's a million notifications. And if you get distracted every single time someone has that stupid ping or notification bubble, you are never going to get anything done. And so I'm a huge advocate of entirely closing email and closing Slack while you're doing any sort of golden hour activity and blocking it at a high enough frequency that you can clear it out during the day. So again, once at 8, once at noon, once in the afternoon. You cannot tell me that the difference between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. or 10 a.m. and noon is radically different. That's number one. Number two, train your manager, who might be annoying like me, that if they need you, text you. This happened the other day where I had to sign an urgent contract and I blocked Slack and email out. And one of my reps texted me saying like, hey, could you sign this deal? I went in and then I got right back into my flow. So train the people around you to do that. And then the last thing is, folks, it's not just what's on your computer. On your phone, you're constantly being vibrated and pinged with nonsense. I've deleted email and Slack from my phone entirely so that it cannot catch me. It is blocked out of my life. And I decide when I get to engage with that stuff, not the other way around.
Yeah, dude, I love that. One thing I always say too is be hard to reach, but responsive. Don't train people. Use that word train. I think is super important. Don't train people that when they message you that you'll respond right away. It's just
Exactly.
that you cannot get stuff done,
Because the moment you do,
Okay.
to that point, people get addicted to the fact that you respond fast, and then people expect you to respond that fast when it's not necessary.
Yeah. Just to throw another question out to the watchers, what's one productivity or time management technique or tactic that you've heard that you feel like you could put into action after this? Let me know in the chat. I was just curious to see what people are taking away. What's one thing, one simple thing that you've heard today that you feel like you could put into action from a productivity or time management standpoint? What's really stuck with you so far? Let us know in the chat. Clint says time blocking. Yeah, attack the open space, the color coding George likes, the 2 hour blocks, golden hours, no lunch, Joshua says. Yeah, love it. Awesome. Okay, let's start to get into more of the bottom, middle, top of funnel kind of tactics. And I want to start top of funnel. What are some, and I'll kick this question your way first, Armand. What are some of the things that you're seeing sort of different right now in terms of top of funnel and just, any kind of tips that you have for account executives, especially doing their own self-sourcing, that sort of stuff? What do you see in work right now?
Yeah. So if you're self-sourcing, I would say that the most important thing right now is less about the cold calling openers haven't changed drastically. Maybe the email messaging and the talk tracks around the problem you solve are more focused on things that can actually be quantified or things that aren't nice to have pain points. In other words, the emotional or the ultimate bottom line impact is what you're speaking to in your emails or your phones. But I actually think the real change for the reps who are finding success happens way up funnel. And it happens with the accounts you select in the first place. And that is where most people go wrong is you might have tiered out your book into gold, silver, and bronze accounts or A, B, and C tier accounts. And before you might have been able to book a meeting with a C tier or a bronze account, and you might have chased that sales cycle. And one of 5 of those C tier accounts might have closed because it was a bull market and anyone could raise $5 million back in the day. But those C tier accounts are now going under. And so what you need to do is you need to be ruthlessly efficient on identifying based on your business. What are the, geez, athletic greens have still got me. Yeah, you have to be ruthlessly efficient on identifying the types of folks who still buy in this market, which are going to be different for your different business, and upfront filter for those folks and specifically prospect into those accounts, and then avoid wasting your time on the folks who are not going to buy. So start with the deals that are being sold today and upfront DQ anything that doesn't look like that.
Yeah. So get rid of the nice to haves, the, hey, I'll reach out to them just in case, that sort of stuff. It's like, if you kind of think about your time, you have a very finite amount of time on a daily and weekly basis, and you're going to have to work extra hard just to get the stuff and the opportunities that you need to, and just don't spend any of that on those C priorities. Jake, this is something that you talked about too. You said disqualify faster. How do you think about that in the top of funnel, outbound, sort of motion? How do you think about disqualifying?
So what I see a lot, especially in this downturn, is sort of a tale of 2 companies, actually 3 companies. You have companies that are contracting, right? And they're trying to do more with less. You have companies that are literally just doing nothing, and their strategy is just to wait and cross their fingers and hope. And then you have folks that are crushing it. I mean, you have folks that aren't even really impacted by this downturn too much. So really what it is for my business, it's focusing on folks that are in number 1, contracting, but wanting to be more efficient with what they do. And obviously folks that are growing, if they're fitting into one of those 2 camps, I can work with them. If they're in the camp of just trying to do nothing, I'm disqualifying that out super, super early. And then the other part of that is early qualification for pain, because essentially what it is not only is it harder to prospect and get meetings, but also these deal cycles are longer and there's more scrutiny, and you have 7 meetings instead of 3 meetings, or 5 meetings instead of 2 meetings, right? So it's a lot of wasted time on these deals. And if there's no pain in this environment, they're realistically not going there. Or sorry, it's realistically not going to go anywhere. So that's kind of my thought is, up front, I think Armand made a great point about the account selection, making sure you're going after the right folks. And then there needs to be a real reason for them to do this. If it's a nice to have, if it's something that's nice, it's priority number 9.
Yeah. So are you figuring this out on a cold call, Jake?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give us a kind of an example of like, what are some of the stuff that you've heard or maybe challenged a prospect on a little bit and disqualified them? What are some examples that people could hear?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I do is when I'm prospecting, part of my prospecting script, or I should say my whole prospecting script, is seeing if they have the pain points that I solve. Like, I know the main pain points that I solve in my world. So Jason, like, I sell to recruiters. If I'm calling you and you're a recruiting firm, literally what I'm saying out of the gate is, hey, Jason, I'm invited in by companies. They're trying to stand out on LinkedIn. They're sending hundreds of messages out and they're not seeing the conversations that they really want to be having. I'm curious, Jason, is that something you're going through? Are you about to tell me that you're placing candidates like crazy and this doesn't make any sense? Right? That's the way I'm booking them. So if they're not responding to that, right? If they tell me that we don't experience that at all, we're good, we're great there, I'm never booking that meeting. They only get on the calendar if they've got those pain points.
Yeah. So what would you, and let me know if this is not what you hear, because a lot of times when I make these with clients and then when I listen to the recordings, sometimes people are just kind of like lukewarm. They aren't really one way or the other, like, oh, it's going okay. Like, how much will you dig with someone to determine whether or not there's a pain?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it is sometimes they're like, yeah, it's okay. Sometimes we see that a little bit, right? So sometimes they'll identify the pain and they'll say, yeah, we're kind of going through that kind of thing. And I think the next question arguably is even more important. How big of a deal is this? Are you okay? Like, is this just kind of something that's a little bit annoying and that in an ideal world you'd like to fix it? Or is this really causing a business pain and you care enough to fix this if I could help? Right? So it's seeing if they care enough, because it's not just about having the problems, it's about caring enough to want to fix them.
Yeah. So Armand, something that you had talked about and that you talk about a lot is this, I guess we've called it disarmingly blunt, right? In a previous webinar that we did together. And Jake, that sounds a lot like your style. Like, dude, you're straight to the point. Like, I want to know. And if you're not dealing with this, like, that's okay. We just don't need to like continue talking about it. Armand, do you have any tips for the folks watching, like, to just adopt more of that style and really kind of make it their own and like not be afraid to talk about the elephant in the room?
Yeah, and so this carries past prospecting, and the biggest culprit is actually once you get into discovery. People feel like the purpose of a discovery call is you have to leave finding a problem, and that is your ideal outcome, but the purpose is really to figure out if there's a problem at all, right? Because the reality is you can chase a deal in this market. I've seen reps hold on to deals for 6 months and they keep saying, yeah, we're going to see if we can get budget. I know we don't have it. I know my boss doesn't care about it, but I really like it. I think it's important. I love what you're doing. Could we do 3 more demos? Could we do maybe a POC? Could we do this over here? Right. And the more you chase bad opportunities, the less time you can spend on the people that will actually close. And sales is a funnel, folks. And the best reps in the world, they cut 80% of it at the top and they nail the 20% of deals that are real, right? And so that's the mindset shift, okay? Tactically, at the end of any discovery call, what you need to do is during that discovery call, have 2 or 3 common pain funnels or question tracks that you run of common problems your prospects have. And if you've gone through all three of those, what you do is at the end of your discovery call, you recap the problems that you've heard, if there were any, and then you just ask them the first question, which is like, look, if you were to buy Pave or 30 MPC or whatever it might be, if you were going to buy this thing today, it sounds like it would be for X, Y, and Z. Before we go and set up a demo, right? If we were able to solve those problems, is this something that you could see the organization buying in the next 3 months? And is it even worth doing that demo? Don't just set a next step for the sake of setting a next step. Put the problems that they shared with you in front of them and ask them, do you want to buy this thing? And that's the first question in the 5-minute drill is, do you want to buy it? The second question is, when do you want to buy it? And then the third question is when you finally set a next step, which is, how do you want to buy it? Which usually sounds like typically we would involve your chief financial officer because budgets are being slashed and they really care about this type of thing. Can we set a next step, which would be a deep dive with your CFO? But those are the three questions. And most people fail to ask the first question, which is, do you want to buy this thing in the first place based on what you know? And if the answer is no, there is no next step to even be set in the first place.
All right. So this is a really good segue into discovery. Could you repeat, Armand, just for those listening? And feel free to just yell it louder if you'd like. No.
Well, yeah.
This is the 5-minute drill. This is going to happen at the end of that first call that you have with the customer. And what are those 3 questions again?
Correct. So 5-minute drill, end of the call. You've run your agenda, your pain funnels, what have you. You recap, and then you ask 3 questions. First question, do you want to buy it? Second question, when do you want to buy? Third question, how do you buy? And naturally, you're not just asking, do you want to buy? There's more nuance there, but that's the so what behind the question.
Got it. And I dropped that into the chat. Jake, what are you seeing? Because multi-threading is something that, I kind of is a really big part of that how do you buy part. Getting other stakeholders involved. Have you seen, what kind of changes have you seen in terms of who needs to be involved during the sales process and buying process? How has that changed, if at all, for you over the last 6-12 months?
Yeah, so most of what I do is small business anyway. Folks with 50 employees or less, 100 employees or less. So with that's always going to C-level. I mean, that's always been, if I'm not getting in front of the owner of the business, the deal's not happening, right? But I do work on mid-market deals as well, where a lot of times, a VP of sales is able to sign off, a director of sales is able to sign off. To Armand's point, now you're getting C-level, and I'm seeing CFOs in the conversation a lot more because there's so much more scrutiny on the budget. So I am seeing that on more of the mid-market accounts.
So if you get a conversation started with someone that is not in the C-suite or an owner of the company, how do you ask about that? How do you get buying in around getting someone to involve someone else in the process? Because this is where I see a lot of folks get stuck asking, hey, who else is the decision maker here? And they ask these really awkward questions that kind of offend the buyer almost, But how do you go about asking that?
So I think the first thing that I want to do is, whoever these folks are, whether it's a director or a VP or an individual contributor, there's a challenge that they're experiencing that your software can solve, right? So for me, it's these folks that, ZoomInfo, contact information, right? It's these folks that are spending all this time calling headquarter lines, going on LinkedIn, sending DMs, right? And so I get them to really open up about the pain, and I really empathize with it. I'm like, hey, that sounds awful. I've done that before. That sounds really, really challenging. And then once we're kind of aligned that what I'm showing them will help them with their pain, we're kind of on the same side of the table at this point. I'm saying, look, I think both of us want the same thing at this point. I want to get ZoomInfo in your hands, and you don't want to be calling headquarter lines for the rest of your sales career, right? Typically, it's not just you who would need to see it, Right. Oh, actually, that's not typically how I'd say it. Typically, what I'd say is typically there's other folks that would need to be involved to move this forward. How does that work at your organization? But I'm aligning on their pain to make sure they're bought in so that they want to do all this stuff.
Yeah. So it's like, make sure the person that you have, that's the first question, Armand, that you ask, like making sure the person you have on the call is sold. They may not, have the purse strings, so to speak, but are they sold that this will solve their problem? And Armand, correct me if I'm wrong, and feel free to add to this. You're asking that question to kind of stress test this person a little bit too. You're stress testing the deal. It's okay to get an objection right there. I'd rather handle that on the spot in the very first time meeting someone than to learn later that they were not fully bought in. Is that kind of the thinking here? And feel free to expand on that.
Exactly right, because you're in a lose-lose situation if you don't ask that first question. Is a lot of there was one interesting question, which is how do you make sure that they give you a yes to the answer to the first question? And the answer to that question is you actually want to hear the no there, because what most sellers do is they get to the end of discovery and they're like, awesome, let's do a demo, right? And one of two things will happen, especially if you try to multi-thread. The first thing that'll happen is they'll say yes, but they might have no intention of buying your thing. Or the second thing that might happen is they'll say, yes, but I don't want to bring in my boss yet, right? And you don't even know why. And usually the answer to the why is in that first question, which is the real why is because it's not a big enough problem for them. And so the reason that these questions work in the right order, folks, is especially 1 and 3 work together, is when I ask, do you want to buy, Jason, you say, X, Y, Z, da, 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 da. This and this are a reservation, but I would say, yeah, like this is something that I'm interested in. I think it solves some problems for us. And I'll do a little bit of discovery there to understand what might blow up a deal. And then from there, when I get to how do you buy, what I need to do is I need to sell it to you based on what you told me in number 1. And so I'm going to say, Jason, it sounds like you've been dealing with these problems for a while. And like, what I want to do is I want to make sure that we get you as much support as possible to make sure that we can help you solve these. Can I give you a sense of like how other customers usually get things done when they're buying Pave? And of course, you'll usually say yes. And I'll be like, usually the first step is we find an awesome champion like you, right? And we find someone who has a problem and something that they're looking to solve. And you and I sort of get on the same side of the table. And then what we usually need to do is, because compensation, that's what I sell. Compensation is something that's pretty important to the chief people officer. Usually they're going to want to be involved. And if we don't involve them early on enough, what we find is if it gets too far down the road, they might blow things up on the finish line. So would you be completely against maybe helping us get that person on board so we can help you solve the problems that you mentioned, number 1? So it has nothing to do with my interests. It's purely, you told me you have a problem. And in order for me to help you solve that problem, I'm going to be your advisor on the right way to get this deal done.
Yes. So you just dropped into the chat, Jake, exactly what Armand doing, because you guys talk about this a ton at Zoom Info, like using your client or your customer voice. So instead of saying, here's what I need from you to do to help you move this deal forward, here's what other people like you have typically done. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that approach, Jake, and how you use that throughout, let's say, a discovery call or through the sales process to really help the prospect kind of see a different way of doing things?
Yeah. And by the way, Armand, the thing I really liked in addition to the client voice is that you asked for permission. Like you said, is it cool if I tell you how this typically happens? It's so impossible to say no to that. So I'm writing that down. But really what I think it's about is we don't want to butt heads with these folks. Like I'm not in here trying to tell folks how to run their business, right? Because then they say, this is how we do it. This is what our process is. And it's kind of me going against them. I'm informing them what their peers are doing and the results that their peers got. So it's not like, hey, Jason, you would make a lot more sales if you called people's cell phone numbers instead of calling the headquarter line. It's like, hey, Jason, I've worked with a lot of companies that tell me kind of the same thing. And oh man, I just lost my train of thought. What they're really telling me is that when they go from calling headquarter lines to calling cell phone numbers, they have 7 times more conversations than when they first started. It's just like an easier way to bring it up. It doesn't feel like I'm selling, like I'm just telling a story.
It feels consultative. It actually sounds like an insight. It sounds like a valuable piece of content thrown into a 30-second clip that you're sharing with me versus telling me that what I'm doing is wrong. This is something I always say to reps that I train is there is an inherent shame in getting a prospect to admit their problems to you. And the shame is that like you're trying to get a stranger who you don't really have that good of a relationship with yet to admit weakness or something that they're not doing well to you. That's really hard to do. What makes it easier to talk about is when you share what other people deal with so they don't feel like they're alone. You know, it's just huge. Armand, I wanted to ask you about CFOs and finance. What does that kind of look like? Are your reps getting CFOs to join calls? Are they joining the calls? Is it working with the champion and building a better business case? Like how exactly are these CFOs or these folks in finance getting involved in the sales cycles?
Yeah. So your dream scenario, your pecking order, folks, is in a dream scenario, you want to be in front of finance. And I would say for the deals that get to that stage, maybe anywhere between 33 and 50% of those deals, you'll actually get in front of finance, right? For the remainder of them, unfortunately, you oftentimes need to sell through a champion, okay? So if we talk about that first case, what you want to do is if you get in front of finance, you want to co-author the case with your champion. But then the second thing you want to do is you want to get inside baseball. And so if you've done a good enough job building a relationship with your champion and with power, what you're doing is you're asking them questions like, hey, when other people have gotten in front of finance, when have they gone forward or asked a purchase? Or, hey, when you think about finding budget for this thing, how much do you think they're going to grind us down on price? Does it actually make sense for us to start a little bit higher? And if you get close enough with a champion, they will literally tell you to start higher because finance needs to get their pound of flesh and you can get on the same side of the table as them, right? That's the best case scenario. The second case scenario is when you're not in front of finance and now you have to sell through a champion. And the key thing here, folks, is if you're selling through an above the line champion, and by above the power line, I mean someone who's oftentimes a VP or above, usually they'll do a pretty good job of justifying your business case where they'll talk about things like we're losing revenue, we have massive business risk, we're losing employees, what have you. But if you get stuck with someone below the line, you need to teach them how to sell above the line. Because what they're oftentimes thinking about is it takes me a long time to do this problem. Or if I'm selling Zoom info, oh, it takes me a long time to find good contact information. Or it takes our SDRs a long time to find good contact information. And what you need to do is you need to train them to speak in finance voice, which is it takes our SDRs a long time to find contact information. And more people aren't buying in today's market. And if we can't find contact information for our key accounts, what that means is given that our whatever revenue trajectory is going down, we're actually going to lose the ability to break into our top 10 accounts. And that is what the narrative needs to be justified to finance. But most people who are below the line sellers can't speak in that language. So you need to teach them and co-author a business case with them to speak in that language so your narrative stays intact when it gets in front of finance.
Ooh, so much there, dude. I love this analogy. Ian Altman wrote a great book called Same Side Selling, and you guys have both used that kind of phrasing, just like getting on the same side of the table, like making sure that it's like us versus them, kind of thing. Can you elaborate, Jake, like with champions, how do you, in the deals that you've worked, how do you know if someone is a champion or not? What are some of the ways that you stress test that relationship?
That's a really good question. Let me think about this for a second. I think the biggest part is how willing they are to get other executives involved. Like if they're showing up and I'm trying to get the second meeting, sometimes they'll push back and they'll say, hey, they don't join sales calls, those types of things. But they're very open about how the buying process happens, and y'all are strategizing together. You can ask questions like, how do we do this? How does the buying process work? Okay, I get it. I can't get in front of your CEO. How have y'all bought software in the past? Like, how do we work together and get this thing done? Right. So it's that a lot of times. I don't think I have anything to add off the top of my head.
Yeah. So again, you're asking for certain things, and an unwillingness to help out and get other people involved is a pretty clear sign that they're not a champion, or that you haven't done a good enough job of making sure that they're solved. And Armand, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would say there are two buckets of where a champion can fall short or can save you, right? The first bucket of is, do they even know what to do, right? And then the second bucket is, do they have the clout to actually get it done? And those are two different things that you test for. So Jake called out a really good question, which really tests for that first bucket of, if I'm not sure if someone knows what to do, I'll start asking questions and I'll be like, awesome, when you've bought software in the past, usually what steps go from this point on, right? And I'll know what I'm looking for. Or I'll ask like, hey, when you think about the legal process, how long does it usually take to first get cuts back, right? And if I get fuzzy answers, I usually know I'm not dealing with a sophisticated buyer, right? And so all you have to do to test for the first bucket of, do you know what to do, is ask about past buying processes, or ask beyond the surface level detail of the specific steps of what it takes to get a deal done. And you'll usually figure out based on their answers what it looks like, right? The second piece is, do they have the clout to get it done? What you need to do is, there are two ways you can test for this. The first way is you can test this by multi-threading, right? And so you can ask them, how good is your relationship with finance, right? Or you can say, hey, if we were to get in front of your boss, what are the types of things that they'd care about, right? What are the things that really irk them and whatnot? And if they give you really good inside scoop that shows that they can think at that higher level, right? When they talk about not their problems, but their boss's problems, then you know you probably have someone who gets it. But if you hear answers that sound like, well, they just want to make sure that I don't spend so much time in spreadsheets or stuff like that, now I know that I have someone who thinks below the line, and probably everyone else in the organization also thinks that they think below the line. Or if you hear things like, we've been wanting to solve this problem for so long, but like no one's realized that this is a problem and this is such a pain for me. What that usually means is people see this person as sort of the complaining person in the org, and they're going to let them continue to deal with those problems. So those are sort of like the two different buckets I would look for.
Great points.
Dude, this is like a masterclass on multi-threading today. There's a couple questions that people have dropped in that I want to get to. Adam O'Neill asked, after figuring out pain and problem with a champion and then selling to finance, do you focus on logic or emotion? And I think there's
if I'm thinking
weighted. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking about finance, I would think it's pretty logical. If I'm talking to the CEO, right, then I'm making it all emotional. Curious what Armand has to say about that, though.
Yeah, people they buy emotionally, and then they justify it logically, right? And a lot of times what you need to do is you need to get your champion in power on board to make the emotional case to finance, but then you need to apply the logical rigor in the background. But a lot of times people think when you get to finance, it's just a math equation, and that's how you get commoditized. What you need to do is you need to make sure that your math equation works, but also have your champion selling on the same side to that point, and going to finance and being like, look, if you make us buy this B tier tool, it's going to be cheaper, but these are the types of problems that we're going to encounter by not buying this tool instead of that tool.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. I got one more question, then we got to take off. Josh Flegg asked earlier, as an SDR, what should my AE be doing to make sure I'm doing what I can to get them to 125% of quota. So AE SDR partnership. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak from my perspective. Really, what it is with me and my SDR is I let her know really what my criteria are and really what I'm looking for, and so I apply those filters on the front end. Like, I don't want her prospecting anyone who doesn't have at least 5 salespeople, as an example, if I'm trying to go after the bigger deals, right? So the way that I see it a lot is I like the AEs to do the account selection, at least at first, and they can show the SDRs how they're selecting the accounts to make sure that everyone's on the same page there. And that just helps with the alignment, because then when they're bringing you meetings with folks that you've already set the criteria and they bring you folks that meet those criteria, right? The chance of them not getting their complete or their demo 2 or stage 2 or whatever they call it, there's less tension between us because we're truly working as a team. And every time they bring me something, it's a great deal for me. I don't feel like I'm completing opportunities just to complete them. And then they're sending them to me and pretty much everything gets completed because I've filtered on the front end. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, clear criteria. Armand, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say the same thing of don't send your SDR on these crazy missions to go after terrible accounts. Your job as an AE is to funnel what you're learning on the front lines of these tough sales cycles and build that all the way into the back end of your account selection so that they focus on the folks that will actually buy up front.
Dude, love it. You two are awesome. I appreciate you guys spending time with us today, and everyone else that's attended as well. Appreciate the time, the engagement, all of that kind of good stuff. Jake, I'll drop your LinkedIn profile into the chat. Where can people go to connect with you or learn more about Zoom Info? And then we'll do the same for you, Armand, and send everyone on their way.
Yeah, just hit me up on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about Zoom Info, send me a DM and I will take care of y'all.
Yeah. Armand, where can people go besides LinkedIn to go check you out, what you're up to?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm the only one with my funny name. But if you want to check out another awesome sales podcast, well, I think it's awesome. But it's, I would actually go and check out Jason's episode or one of his multiple episodes on 30 Minutes to President's Club. For anyone who's listened to it before, we're super tactical. It's 30 minutes, hyper focused, just like the stuff that you got today. And Jason has been on, I think, 3 times now. And so go listen to one of his, and it's been a fun show.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a killer rest of your week. We'll see ya.
Cool.
Later.
Thanks, folks. Cheers.